My parents invited 200 people to my 30th birthday dinner not to celebrate me, but to publicly disown me and hand me a $400,000 debt. I walked out without a word. 4 days later, they were begging. The server near the wall had stopped breathing. I noticed that first. Not my father standing, not the brown envelope hitting the tablecloth like a gavel, not the 200 forks freezing simultaneously in the air. I noticed a 20-something kid in a white apron, a pitcher of water in his hand, going completely, perfectly still, like he'd been paused. Like even a stranger understood that whatever was happening at table 1 was the kind of thing you don't interrupt. My father straightened his jacket. He did it slowly, both hands, the way he used to before church, before parent-teacher conferences, before any room where he needed to be the most important person present. I'd watched that gesture 10,000 times. It still worked on my nervous system the way it always had. A cold tightening in my chest, a split-second impulse to sit straighter, speak quieter, take up less space. 30 years of conditioning doesn't evaporate just because you moved out. Everything we spent raising you, he said. His voice was dinner party calm, measured, like he was proposing a toast. $400,000. Time to pay it back. The envelope sat in front of me. Thick, cream-colored, sealed. Then Ashley, my sister, 2 years younger, wearing a dress I'd told her looked beautiful when she texted me the photo 3 days ago, reached across the table with 2 lazy fingers, like she was picking up someone else's trash, and lifted my car keys from beside my bread plate. Dad already handled the title transfer, she said. You don't belong here anymore. She smiled when she said it. Not a nervous smile. Not an apologetic, I have to do this smile. A smile she'd been holding in for a while, the kind that's been waiting for its moment. I looked at the envelope. I looked at the keys dangling from her fingers. I looked at the 200 people. Family friends, neighbors, people I'd known since I was in diapers, all staring at their plates, their water glasses, the centerpieces, anywhere that wasn't my face. My mother sat at the other end of the table and didn't look up once. I pushed back my chair. The legs scraped against marble flooring so loudly it seemed obscene. I picked up my purse. I stood. Nobody stopped me. The music kept playing behind me as I walked out. Something instrumental. Something that cost money to hire. Something that had absolutely no idea what it was providing a soundtrack for. I made it to the parking lot before I remembered the car wasn't mine to look for anymore. I called an Uber. I stood under a parking lot light for 11 minutes, wearing a dress I'd bought specifically for tonight, and I watched the little car icon inch its way toward me on a map. I didn't cry. I want to be clear about that. Not because I was strong. Not because I was numb. I didn't cry because something in my body understood even then that tears were a currency I couldn't afford to spend yet. Here's the thing nobody tells you about a family like mine. It doesn't feel like dysfunction when you're inside it. It feels like love with conditions, which is just love, as far as you know. My name is Emily Hartwell. I'm 30 years old, as of the night in question. A contracts paralegal with Delaney and Morris, where I've worked for 6 years. I'm methodical. I'm good at reading fine print. I notice things. I've been told this makes me difficult, which I've come to understand means I don't let things slide that other people prefer left sliding. My father is Richard Hartwell. He built a regional landscaping company from a single truck into something with 40 employees and a logo on the side of a fleet. He has the handshake of a man who considers that handshake a performance. He has never once, in my memory, said the words I was wrong. My mother is Carol. She is the kind of woman who sends birthday cards 3 weeks early and has strong opinions about throw pillows. She has stood beside my father for 34 years, and in all that time, I have never been certain whether she was on his side or whether she simply never learned there were other sides to choose from. Ashley is 28. She was always the one who got it right. The right tone, the right smile, the right way of sliding into whatever shape the room needed. I used to admire it. Later, I understood it differently. Growing up, I was the one who asked questions. Why did we have to spend holidays with relatives who made comments? Why did Dad need to sign off on where Mom volunteered? Why was a B+ in AP chemistry treated like a moral failing? Questions like that weren't encouraged in our house. They were treated as symptoms of something. Ingratitude, maybe. A defect in my character that needed managing. I moved out at 23. Graduate school, then my own apartment, then a life that was genuinely mine. I came back for holidays. I called on birthdays. I stayed in the group chat. I maintained the relationship the way you maintain a house in a floodplain. Carefully, constantly, with one eye always on the weather. Last March, my mother texted me a photo of their living room. She'd redecorated. The gallery wall above the fireplace, the one with 30 years of family photos, had been redone. New frames, new arrangement. I looked at the image for a long time before I understood what was different. Every photo of me was gone. I texted back, "It looks beautiful. When did you redo the frames?" She replied with a heart emoji. I stared at that heart emoji for a long time. I told myself it was a staging thing. I told myself she'd probably rotated photos around and some were in other rooms now. I told myself a lot of things. The way you tell yourself things when the alternative is too large to look at directly. That was 8 months before the birthday dinner. In hindsight, it was the first page of the document. The Uber driver had the radio on low. He didn't say anything. I stared out the window the whole ride home. When I got to my apartment, I set the envelope on the kitchen table. Then I went to bed. I didn't open it. I didn't look at it. I lay in the dark and listened to my own breathing and waited for the shock to metabolize into something I could use. By 6 a.m., it had. I got up, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with the envelope and the brightest desk lamp I owned. I photographed every page before I touched anything. Clean scans, good light, all four corners visible, timestamp on my phone. Then I read it. The document ran to 14 pages. It had the look of something official. Formatted headers, itemized columns, a real accounting firm's letterhead at the bottom. Pryor Caldwell Financial Associates. The kind of name that's supposed to end a conversation. I read it the first time fast, just absorbing. I read it the second time slowly. The third time, I stopped being Emily who was ambushed at her birthday dinner and started being Emily who reads contracts for a living. The rent charges started coming in from the wrong years. There were months listed after I'd already moved into my own apartment. Rent supposedly paid on a room I hadn't slept in for years. There was a medical bill dated from my sophomore year of college, a year I was fully covered under the university's student health plan. There was an itemized education charge that, when I cross-referenced my own records, had been partially covered by a scholarship that apparently hadn't made it into Dad's accounting. And then, the vehicle. Line item, page 9. Vehicle contribution, 2019. Honda Accord, $18,400. The same car Ashley had just announced was hers now. You can't list a vehicle as a debt owed by one person and simultaneously transfer the title of that vehicle to another person. Those two things cannot coexist, which means either the accounting document was fraudulent or the title transfer was, or both. I sat with that for a moment. Then I called Pryor Caldwell Financial Associates on Monday morning. I didn't accuse anyone. I didn't mention the dinner. I simply identified myself by name and asked whether their firm had prepared a family reimbursement statement for Richard and Carol Hartwell. The receptionist went quiet in a way that had texture to it. Then a man picked up. His voice was professionally careful. He asked who I was. I gave him my name. He said he couldn't discuss client records. I thanked him pleasantly and hung up. That answer told me everything. If the document had been a straightforward, legitimate accounting, if it was just a family settling old debts, his response would have been different. What I got instead was the sound of a firm that already knew this might become a problem. I added the call to my notes. 9:14 a.m., Monday. Receptionist transferred, male voice. Declined to confirm or deny. I went to work. I found Margaret Osei through a referral from a colleague who'd gone through a contentious estate dispute the previous year. She had 17 years of civil litigation experience, a reputation for not flinching, and an office that smelled like old books and decent coffee. On Thursday afternoon, I sat across from her desk and laid out every page. She read without speaking, legal pad open, pen moving occasionally. When she turned to the accounting firm letterhead, something in her expression shifted, just a fraction, the way a doctor's face changes when a scan shows something they weren't expecting. She looked up. How many people heard your father state that this was money you owe? Close to 200. How many heard your sister state the title transfer had already been completed? At minimum, the 6 tables closest to us. Probably 60, 70 people. Did you sign anything? That night or at any prior point? No. She wrote that down, underlined it. My phone lit up on the desk between us. My father's name on the screen. The name that had, for 30 years, arrived in my nervous system like a weather event before I could consciously register it. Margaret glanced at the screen, then at me. Let it go to voicemail. I did. We both waited 30 seconds. Then she hit speaker and we listened together. His voice was different without the room, without the jacket straightening and the audience and the performance of it. What came through the phone instead was thinner, managed. Emily, this was a family conversation. Stop acting like it's a legal matter. Margaret's pen stopped. She looked at me. She picked up the phone and replayed it. Then again. A family conversation, she said quietly, writing. He called not to apologize. He called to rename what he did before you could name it first. She was right. That's exactly what it was. He was filing a preemptive motion on the vocabulary. Then my phone buzzed. Ashley, not a call, a photo. My car in their driveway. Ashley's hand dangling the keychain toward the camera. Underneath, you should have cried when you had the chance. I turned the phone toward Margaret across the desk. For the first time in 45 minutes, her composure cracked, very slightly. Her mouth tight. She turned the legal pad toward me. 3 words at the top of a fresh page, written in her handwriting. Not family drama. I built the folder that night. Named it Q4 Contracts Reference. Boring, administrative, easy to open when your hands are unsteady. I have learned that functional organization is a form of courage. Inside, every voicemail, time-stamped, every text, screenshot with metadata showing, every page of the envelope document, my own counter documentation, the scholarship letter, the university health plan enrollment, my lease from 2016 proving my move-out date, the utility bills from my first apartment establishing residency. I started making calls, not accusatory calls, just quiet, methodical outreach to people who'd been in that restaurant. My cousin Daniel texted back within an hour. He said the whole thing had made him sick and he'd tell anyone whatever he heard. He'd been at the center table, directly adjacent. He remembered the exact wording. A family friend named Patricia, who'd known my parents for 20 years and still met my mother for lunch, called me privately. She was crying slightly when she picked up. She told me that near the restrooms, before the dessert course, she'd overheard Ashley tell 2 of the younger cousins that the car was basically handled. Basically. Not legally transferred. Not the paperwork is done. Basically. I wrote it down. Patricia. Full name, contact, date of conversation, her exact recollection of Ashley's exact words. Basic, I've learned in 6 years of contract work, is the most expensive word in any document. On Tuesday, Pryor Caldwell Associates stopped being silent. A man called, different from Monday, smoother, more polished, and explained that the document I'd been provided was not intended as a legal demand, that it was a family communication, that they hoped there'd been no misunderstanding about its nature. I was pleasant. I asked him to confirm that in an email. He paused. I waited. We'd prefer to keep this conversation informal, he said. Of course, I said. I understand completely. I hung up and sent Margaret a voice memo of my notes on the conversation, time and date, his name as he'd given it. They were scared. Not uncomfortable scared. Structurally scared. The kind of scared that comes when a firm realizes their letterhead is on a document that's been photographed and handed to a litigation attorney. Ashley lasted the longest. She texted Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Steering wheel selfies. Pictures of herself in the driver's seat. A photo of my parking spot in my parents' driveway, now occupied. Laughing emojis. The occasional, how does it feel? I didn't respond once. Thursday, she called 4 times. Friday, 9 times. Saturday was quiet. Sunday night, she called 17 times in 4 hours. I watched my phone light up across my apartment from the couch, eating leftover pasta, and I felt something I can only describe as geological, like watching weather from behind glass, like understanding, for the first time in my life, that her behavior had never really been about me. It had been about an audience, and I'd stopped being one. Her final voicemail was not the voice of the woman who dangled my keys at a table in front of 60 witnesses. It was panicked. Genuinely, structurally panicked. Emily, Dad said you're making this official. You can't do that, okay? The car is mine. He promised. He told me. It's mine. You need to stop whatever you're doing, okay? Call me back. Emily, he promised. Not, I bought it. Not, the title is in my name. Not, I have documentation. He promised. I saved it to the folder. Here is where I need to introduce you to 3 people who changed what happened next. Because this is not a story about me defeating my family alone. This is a story about what happens when you stop carrying things privately and let the right institutions get involved. The first was Margaret O.C., whom you've already met. 17 years, civil litigation, yellow legal pad, the 3 words that changed my vocabulary. The second was Detective Renee Ballard, Consumer Fraud Division, who agreed to take my meeting after Margaret made a call. Detective Ballard had 22 years on the force and the energy of someone who has heard every version of every story and is no longer surprised by any of them, but is still, somehow, angry on behalf of the people the stories happened to. She read the document. She listened to the voicemails. She looked at the accounting firm letterhead for a long time. They put their name on this, she said. Letterhead and everything, I said. She shook her head slowly. The shake of someone who works in a city and has seen a lot of audacity. The third was James Whitfield, an attorney who specialized in elder law and fraudulent asset transfer. Margaret had referred him for a specific question she wanted answered, whether the car title transfer, announced publicly, celebrated on social media by Ashley, but never legally documented, constituted attempted theft of property. James Whitfield had been practicing for 31 years. He had the kind of energy that is so completely unbothered by drama that it makes drama look ridiculous. He looked at Ashley's texts. He listened to her voicemail. He noted the timestamp on her photo, the one of my car in the driveway, which had been posted publicly on her Instagram story before being privately texted to me. She posted this publicly, he said, with location tag. He made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. Okay, he said. Here's what we have. What we had was this. A document prepared on professional letterhead demanding the repayment of $400,000, delivered in front of witnesses, containing provably false line items, expenses for periods when I demonstrably didn't live in the house, medical costs covered by a third-party insurer, educational charges offset by scholarships, which together constituted what James called fraudulent misrepresentation of debt. What we additionally had was a vehicle valued at $18,400, listed as a parental contribution within that fraudulent document, subsequently announced as having been title transferred to a third party, my sister, a transfer that, upon inquiry to the DMV, had not in fact been processed. The car was, legally, still mine. Ashley had been driving my car. The Instagram photos confirmed it. The GPS data attached to those photos confirmed it. The voicemail in which she described ownership solely as something her father had promised confirmed it. James Whitfield picked up his phone and made a call, the kind of call that comes with a case number. 4 days after the birthday dinner, my phone started ringing. My father called 7 times on day 4. My mother called twice, which was its own kind of message. My mother, who almost never initiated contact on anything that might cause discomfort, calling twice in one afternoon. Ashley had stopped calling after Sunday's 17 attempts, which meant she'd been told something, possibly the same thing the accounting firm had started to piece together. I didn't answer any of them. On day 5, I came home from work to find a handwritten note in my apartment building's lobby, left with the front desk. It was in my mother's handwriting. Emily, please. This is a family matter. Your father is not well. We need to talk. I photographed it, added it to the folder, forwarded it to Margaret. I want to be honest about something. I didn't feel righteous about any of this. I want to be clear about that because I think stories like this are supposed to have a moment where the protagonist becomes certain, becomes strong, becomes the hero of the narrative. And I'm not sure that's what I was. What I was mostly was tired and methodical and doing one small thing at a time because small things were the only things I could manage. The night I received the note, I sat by my window for a long time. I thought about being 7 and falling off my bike on our street and my father coming out and helping me up without a word word, and that silence feeling like tenderness because I was 7, and that was all I had to compare it to. I thought about my mother teaching me to make pie crust, her hands over mine, flour on the counter. I thought about Ashley at 14, in the backyard, laughing at something I'd said. Actually laughing, not performing it. I thought about all of it. And then I thought about a 20-something server near a wall at a restaurant, holding a pitcher of water, going completely still. Even a stranger had known. They'd known, and they'd done nothing. And the world had continued, and my father had straightened his jacket, and they'd let it happen. I went to sleep. I had a meeting in the morning. The meeting was with all 3 of them, Margaret, Detective Ballard, and James Whitfield. And it was the most professionally strange 45 minutes of my life, in the way that formal proceedings always feel surreal when they're about your own life. Margaret had filed the civil claim. James had filed a report with the DMV Fraud Division regarding the announced but non-processed title transfer, and a separate inquiry with the State Bar regarding Pryor Caldwell's potential liability for lending their letterhead to a fraudulent debt instrument. Detective Ballard had opened a formal consumer fraud investigation and had, in the preceding 4 days, made contact with Pryor Caldwell Associates directly. They responded within 3 hours, she said, which tells you something. It told me they had counsel on speed dial now. The accounting firm had already submitted what Ballard described as a complete account reversal, a formal communication stating that the document delivered to me had been a draft communication prepared as part of a family estate planning discussion, was not finalized, was not intended as a legal demand, and had been shared prematurely without the firm's authorization. Without the firm's authorization. My father, in other words, had taken something from their office that wasn't ready or wasn't sanctioned or both, and now they were covering themselves by throwing him directly under the bus on the public record. Will that hold up? I asked Ballard. For them? Maybe. That's their problem. For your case? She tilted her head. It actually helps you, because it means the document they handed you has been officially disavowed by the firm whose name was on it, which makes the demand even less legitimate than it already was. What about the vehicle? James said. Ballard nodded. Ashley Hartwell drove a vehicle she doesn't own to 3 separate locations over 4 days, which we can document from the Instagram geotags. The DMV has confirmed the title remains in Emily's name. We have her on record, voicemail, stating her claim to the vehicle is based on a verbal promise from her father, not a legal transfer. That's unauthorized use of a motor vehicle, potentially more, depending on how the DA wants to pursue. How does my father factor in? I asked. He told his younger daughter she could have property he didn't fully own to give. That's a problem. And the people who witnessed the announcement at the restaurant? Margaret leaned forward. That's the beautiful thing about your father's choice of venue, she said, and I heard something dry and precise in her voice. He chose an audience. He chose credible, named, identifiable witnesses. He made his announcement in the most documentable way possible. He thought witnesses would confirm the legitimacy of the claim. He didn't think about what those same witnesses would say when asked, in writing, what they heard him say. Daniel, it turned out, had not been the only one willing to speak. 6 other people submitted written statements, voluntarily, without me asking twice. Family friends. A cousin who drove 3 hours and was already appalled by the end of dessert. Patricia, with her full account of Ashley near the restrooms, using the word basically. My father had wanted an audience. He got one. I want to tell you what happened to the specific people involved, because I think that's what you're waiting for, and I also think you deserve the honest version, which is slower and less cinematic than the version that plays well in a 2-minute recap. Pryor Caldwell Associates settled quietly with me in a civil action within 6 weeks. I can't share the number. What I can tell you is that their statement disavowing the document also cost them their relationship with my father, who, according to secondhand accounts that made their way to me through Daniel, was furious at being abandoned so quickly. He had, apparently, believed they would stand behind the paperwork. He had apparently not understood what it meant that their name was on it. Ashley did not face criminal charges for the vehicle. The DA reviewed the file and declined to prosecute, citing the lack of a clear paper trail establishing intent versus a genuine misunderstanding about ownership. I disagreed with that decision. Margaret felt it was reasonable given the evidentiary bar. The car was returned to me within 8 days of the DMV inquiry, driven to my building by a man I didn't recognize, and left with a note that said only key under visor, no signature. My father and mother retained an attorney immediately upon learning that formal proceedings had been initiated. Their attorney contacted Margaret with an opening position that described my civil claim as an unfortunate escalation of a private family disagreement and proposed a mediated conversation instead. Margaret's response was brief. The claim proceeded. I will not tell you everything about what came out in discovery. Some of it involves my parents' finances in ways that are theirs to carry. What I will tell you is that the counter documentation, my scholarship letters, my lease agreements, my university health records, held up exactly as I'd expected. What I will also tell you is that 3 line items in the original $400,000 document, when cross-referenced against financial records my parents were required to produce, turned out to have already been charged against a separate family account that had been quietly maintained for a different purpose. The accountant who'd originally prepared the document, a junior associate at Pryor Caldwell, who was not the man who'd answered my Monday morning phone call, gave a deposition. She was 29 years old and very visibly frightened. She said she'd been given the figures by my father and asked to format them into a family accounting statement. She said she'd flagged 2 of the line items as potentially inconsistent, but had been told they were correct by the client. She She said the document had been declared final before she'd been told it would be presented formally. She didn't know about the birthday dinner. She didn't know about the 200 people. She'd thought it was a document for an estate planning conversation. When she learned what it had actually been used for, she cried briefly in the deposition and then composed herself and said, "I'm sorry. I'm really sorry that happened to you." I believed her. The settlement, I'll call it that because that's what it was, reached through mediation 14 weeks after the birthday dinner, included a formal written acknowledgement that the document presented to me was not a valid legal demand, that I owed no debt to my parents as described or at all, and that the vehicle in question had remained my legal property at all times. It included a financial component that covered my legal fees and a sum beyond that which I've put into savings and don't think about often. It did not include an apology from my father. I want to be transparent about that. I didn't ask for one and I didn't get one, and I have spent some time sitting with both of those facts. His attorney's language throughout was careful, procedural, the language of people who have been told not to admit anything. I never saw his face after the night at the restaurant. I don't know what it looked like when his accountant abandoned him. I don't know what it looked like when his audience of 200 people, the people he'd assembled to witness my humiliation, started writing statements for my lawyer instead. I imagine he straightened his jacket. I imagine it didn't help. My mother sent me one email directly from her personal account, bypassing both lawyers. Margaret said I didn't have to read it. I read it. It was 3 paragraphs. The first said she loved me. The second explained in ways I found unconvincing that the dinner had been Richard's idea and had gone further than discussed. The third asked if we could have lunch sometime. I have not replied. I don't know if I will. That's not a triumphant statement. That's just where I am right now. It's been 9 months. I have my car back. It needed new brake pads, which I found out at the first service appointment, and which struck me as such a perfect metaphor that I actually laughed out loud in the waiting room, and the service advisor looked at me with concern. I have the folder, still on my laptop, labeled Q4 Contracts Reference. I haven't opened it in 6 weeks. That feels significant. I have an apartment that is mine in every way that apartment can be mine. My name, my lease, my photos on the walls, photos that include me. I have learned some things that I will carry for the rest of my life. I have learned that people who need an audience for their worst behavior are, at some level, aware that they need witnesses. They just miscalculate which direction witnesses can work. I have learned that a document prepared in bad faith still functions as evidence, just not the evidence its creator intended. I have learned that the hardest thing about being methodical in a crisis is that methodical people don't get to have the public meltdown that might have made everyone understand how badly they were hurt. You just have to be fine, professionally and persistently, until fine becomes real. I have learned that a boring folder name is not nothing. It is, in fact, the whole thing. On the 9-month anniversary of the birthday dinner, I went to a restaurant alone, a nice one, not the same one, and I ordered the 3-course menu, and I sat at a table by the window, and I ate dessert and coffee in the same meal, something they'd interrupted before I'd had the chance. The server was probably 22. He was perfectly pleasant. He had no idea what I was celebrating. I didn't tell him. Some things you celebrate quietly. Some justice is private. Some of the most important things you will ever do will happen in rooms where nobody claps. My father stood up in front of 200 people and placed an envelope on a table in front of me like it was the final word. It wasn't. He forgot, or maybe he never understood, that in 30 years of raising someone who reads fine print, you teach them something. He handed me the evidence. I just knew what to do with it.